You're tuned in to RX Radio.
Welcome back to RX Radio. As I sit down today with Eric Bagheera, I'm Jordan Junta, your host as some of the time. Today, Eric and I sat down. We talked about basically everything training general population clients and even the experience of going through your career as a trainer in general. So a lot of things that you'll experience early on, kind of the learning curve to training, and some of the things that we thought were very pertinent to focus on and really kind of sink your attention into early on in your training career and how to progress as a career trainer. So I had a great conversation with Eric. Thanks for being here, Eric. Can you just give us a brief introduction on your experience in training?
Yeah, of course. I have a duality of experience, one being sort of the academic side. I've got a master's degree in kinesiology as well as a second undergrad in nutritional sciences, but I've been a personal trainer in some capacity for the better part of probably 12 years now, both in person and then most recently online. And I spend a lot of my time now through Prescript, specifically, obviously, with Prescript Collective, as well as facilitating the hypertrophy course now, trying to translate as much of my knowledge and experience as I possibly can, especially to like younger trainers, trying to foster their ability to withstand the pressure of that early launch and like probably the first couple of years where it is probably the most confusing. You get inundated with a ton of information and stressful because you're trying to get a business up and running all at once. So trying to facilitate as much sort of knowledge, wisdom, experience as I can to help support them through that time so they can actually use all the things that we're teaching them and really apply themselves within the field.
Awesome. Yeah, Eric does a great job with it. He's a wealth of knowledge and experience. So if you would like to get in touch with him, he's very active in the Prescript Collective. Other than that, you can find him at the hypertrophy course. We'll probably have sometime next year, end of this year. And then if you guys are looking into some of the Prescript courses, what we have launching over the summer, we have the barbell course, all things powerlifting with Stu Locke and Jordan Chow. I'll be launching in June. In July, we have a couple course launches. We have our sports performance nutrition with Phil Smith. Very complete course, very good course offering. Killian Hamilton has skill acquisition, also launching in July. And we have a brand new course offering with Kyle Baxter. Performance mechanics is tentatively what we'll call that. All things biomechanics and the application to performance. So we have a pretty good course offering coming up over the summer. Our next class of the online level 1 will be September, fall intake. So keep your eyes out for that. You guys can go to the website to sign up to our newsletter to get notifications about all these things, www.pre-script.com. I hope you guys enjoy the podcast.
Yeah. So even to as of today, like it's sparking off of what we were just talking about. But Shallow was in a podcast with Dr. Gabrielle Lyon, I think her name was, and they brought up the topic of NARP, and he tagged something like that or got tagged again the other day, and I DM'd him about it because I've never identified with a statement so much as NARP, non-athletic regular person. And like I know there's like real athletes that will never feel like a regular person, like you're an athlete for life or what, like that's how you train or that's the mentality you come into everything with. I had my athletic days when I was in like my teens, and then I just petered out. I'm like, I don't really care that much. I really care about training and exercise and taking care of myself. I thoroughly enjoy that and am driven to do that. But it's never really like, there's not a whole lot of sporting things that really allure to me to like dig in and really specialize. So I'm just sitting there in the gym being like, I'm trying to just manipulate all of my experience and all my training knowledge to account for how tired and how chaotic my life is currently. And just that statement again, that NARP, just non-athletic regular person. I'm like, that's exactly pretty much to a T how I would describe myself, even though like others would be like, oh, you made so much progress on this. And like, it's 100% on the back of ruthless nutritional and training consistency more than anything outside of those two lenses. And it kind of exactly what you were teeing up before we hit play was, how do I decipher everything out there to somehow manipulate it to most benefit me whenever I need it? And I think that's something that actually is kind of top of mind, considering we all exist on the internet at all times at this stage. Like really posing it to anyone listening, like when you go onto the internet and you're seeking education, which is it's still a surreal thing to me to operate in that space or to consider ourselves in the education sort of sphere. But if you were to like jump into social media with the premise of I'm going to seek out, or even just through osmosis, through the algorithm, be exposed to educational content, what is your end goal with that? is it to shape how you train to fit what you just got told, or is it to manipulate what you just got told to best service you when you need it? So me being permanently exhausted, sacrificing any and all of my own priorities to those around me that I care about most, and being like, I still need to not die and I still need to look the part. So I'm going to go and train when necessary, how necessary, and what have you. That's really like, I don't necessarily actively seek out the educational aspect anymore. I've logged my time in that realm. But the stuff I see via osmosis as slowly keeps like adding clay to my mold of how I understand how to train. It's always through the lens of how do I manipulate this to best service me, as opposed to getting shoved too far in a direction of, if I don't do it this exact way, no gains. Like, I think I have enough experience to sort of shove that to the side. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at it, because I think acquiring knowledge is a really important part of this process when you don't have the knowledge, right? Is you need a certain baseline of exercise execution, exercise organization to be able to be effective in that. But once you get to that point where you're relatively proficient in that, then continuing to push the envelope doesn't get you much further, right? It's understanding how to periodize this for real life. They're the words I would use for it, and kind of summing up what you're saying is that life is chaos. There's so much bullshit going on all the time that if your constants are your training, your nutrition, and like your sleep, then you're in a pretty good place to be able to manipulate those variables to adjust for everything that's going on around you. And as you were saying that, it really resonated with me, because that's exactly how I approach my training. Is that, especially where we exist in this online space of online coaches and online training, everything exists in an app or on a spreadsheet, right? It's everyone refers to their program, and a lot of people, they'll follow their program to the T, and they think that's the secret to success, when actually in real life, this is how I approach my training. I can't remember the last time I wrote out a training block. I just have this idea in my mind. I'm going to train, the organization of all this would be, I'm going to train 4 days a week. I want to, this is for me. So it's Olympic weightlifting, but you could do this with any discipline. Is I'm going to snatch on Mondays. I'm going to jerk or do overhead work on Tuesdays, clean on Wednesdays. And then on Fridays, I'm going to do some sort of like snatch and clean and jerk, like weightlifting specific exercise. So I organize it that way. And then every other variable is reactive to the chaos in my life. Is that, oh, I'm on a plane this week, so I'm probably not going to train this day. Or I haven't eaten today because I spent all day talking to Eric Bagheera on the internet. And whatever it might be, is that you can dial in your training, or if your training is a constant, then you can adjust that in terms of intensity, exercise selection. You can scale it back and forth depending on the other chaos that you're dealing with on a day-to-day or a week-to-week basis. So once you start to open up that mindset, is that it's not necessarily linear progression until death. It's not, I have to follow A1, A2, B1, B2, whatever it might be that's written in your spreadsheet. It's that understanding that in the real world, we need to be variable with this stuff. And if we're not variable, then we're inevitably going to fail in whatever it is that we're pursuing. And that can be really bad for morale, for mindset, for compliance. So if we kind of tap into the real life aspect of all this, is that we need to be variable and set an expectation around being variable in the process, so that you can have guaranteed long-term success, because we're adjusting along the way. It's not these specific points in which we need to hit week over week, or sets, reps, whatever that might be, because then that starts to get people thinking that they're failing if they're not hitting those because of the other chaos that's going on in life.
Yeah, the internet's full of those super fun idioms where like your projected avatar of yourself on the internet, the curated sort of most optimal iteration of that you want to present. Everybody likes to act as though like the chaos doesn't exist, but the chaos is constant. The constant ability to navigate the chaos as it slowly chips away at what that sort of idealized version of your training is really what shows how much experience you have in it. Because a lot of the things that you'll read or hear about or learn through the very selective means of social media or the internet more broadly, it's in this vacuum that as you have more experience, you kind of realize like, well, that's unrealistic. It's the old adage of like the clipboard wearing fucking pocket protector young trainer that's like, oh, well, Nancy, we all have 24 hours in the day. We all have those same 24 hours. And it's off the tail end of what I ranted on in actually one of your labs. I think it was last week, where I just popped off on like, if you can focus on X, Y, or Z. I think it was even like really self-identifying as someone that does cold plunges, like centering your entire personality on one specific thing, but that's a sidebar. You need more responsibilities in your life to have that perspective at that stage. Like, we all definitely have 24 hours in the day, but not all of them are created equal. When responsibility and allostatic load and the chaos of having to manage different business, family, overall mental staleness or fatigue, all these kind of crazy things that may actually interject into a 21-year-old's life, maybe 5 years down the road when they run into that wall of development. You have to be able to understand those and how they may interface with what you're actually reading, because the amount of things that I saw in the last several years as I became more and more re-involved, I guess, in this space, just see the thing and immediately check that box. It's like, okay, that's a neat little factoid that they're using for their content, but that's a completely unrealistic thing for many people, even myself, most of the time. And I'm just like, my entire life, as much as it can be, is still centered around the fitness space.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said the word in there, allostatic load. And I have an understanding of that. Maybe some of the listeners don't, but my understanding of an allostatic load is that that's basically the complete amount of stress in which you deal with in your life, right? And I mean, what's your understanding of that word, and how does that apply to exercise? I guess that's a better way to ask that.
Yeah. So for the listeners at home, Junta is very good about just leading with, but don't listen to me because I'm an idiot.
I'm an idiot. Yeah, you don't just listen to the smart guy in this conversation, who is Eric and not me.
I also might be an idiot sometimes. Allostatic load, I'm same. Maybe I'm misusing the phrase, but I'm pretty sure my interpretation, or we'll just define it as our interpretation moving forward, and that's just what it is. Allostatic load, allostatic stress is basically the accumulation of stress from all sources, knowing that you could have the obvious sort of distress, like I am freaking out about things, I'm in physical pain, I have this looming deadline, like things that are going to cause anxiety or actual like stress the way most people look at it. It could be eustress, just from just things that are even going well, but it's things that are still on your plate, monopolizing mental space. Just the overall list of responsibilities in your life acting in or on your ability to perform. It could chip away at your ability to sleep. It could chip away at your ability to eat well, anything like that. So it could be a physical, being training obviously as the front and center thing that we probably all recognize more as like the highlight of what allostatic load could be physically. It could also just be if you have a physical job, anything that really is a physical thing. But then the psychological or the more stress induced from things that are not physical is, I think, the thing that people don't account for nearly as much, because it, again, to use another idiom, it all comes from the same place. Your cup can only get so full. So those are the things that, again, when you are trying to tailor your training or trying to understand like what is the best dose, what is the best thing for you to do right now, accounting for anything that could be a physical or a otherwise stressor is a sound practice to keep like a running checklist in the back of your mind.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. And I didn't think it was going to take us down this route when we started talking today, but this leads me to think of the word recovery, which can be super buzzwordy in the fitness space, especially around people that don't really understand what that means. Is what is recovery? It's just kind of this smoke bomb that people drop as, oh, just do recovery. And sometimes that's like a light bike ride and some static stretching and like a green juice or whatever. But I think if we can look at this through the lens of allostatic load and kind of a couple other subcategories of recovery, is that that's probably going to be one of the most important ones, is understanding. I sum it up as stress management. And that could be physical stress, that could be psychological stress. It could be anything that's going to impact your ability to perform. So that could be, and I also lump in load management in there, is because a big part of your recovery process is going to be how much are you driving yourself into the ground with your workouts, right? So that falls into the physical stress category. And I personally have been in places where in high school I worked at a warehouse where we would deliver horse feed, and we would deliver like a 2-ton pallet or pallets of horse feed to a racetrack. And I know if I'm carrying, a couple 1,000 pounds of horse feed all day, I'm probably gonna have a really shit workout later. It's like understanding all these factors. And then also, even now, like I sit here and I talk to Eric Bagheera on the internet all day, which is the best. It's not very physically taxing. Sometimes it can be mentally taxing. So understanding how that's going to affect me and my motivation heading into a workout. So I think that's a big part of it. And even if it is something that's less physically taxing like this, understanding that, okay, how is that going to affect the loading that I'm using in my workout? And then how is the loading that I'm using in that workout going to affect the next workout or the one after? And what does that look like throughout a training week? So I think understanding allostatic load in that perspective or through that lens helps you understand load management, and not just load like load on the bar, but allostatic load throughout the week or throughout, a training phase, whatever, however that timeline looks as a part of recovery. And then the other sides of recovery, we always have to look at where where I'm definitely going to pass it to you, because you did already mention like consistency through nutrition. Is nutrition is going to be the two other things that matter. The only three things matter is going to be stress management, in my mind, sleep, quality and duration of sleep, and then nutrition. Outside of that, there's recovery doesn't exist outside of those three things in my mind. So you did mention consistency through nutrition. What are some practices that you put into play with a lot of your clients? Because I know you work with a very kind of broad range of clients, but I think we can kind of sum them up as general population humans, right?
Yeah, because I would lump a lot of, so I train obviously like tried and true Gen Pop, like people just
Yeah.
want the average, like the people that want to look better, feel better,
Mm-hmm.
not be in pain, the whole thing. And then I train a lot of trainers as I've sort of developed in my own career. And word to the wise, most of us, if not all of us, are also NARPs. I am a NARP. They are a NARP. We're all NARPs.
We're
There's
all
a very
NARPs.
few, at least in my roster, that are very highly competitive athletes.
Mm-hmm.
They could be intermediate level or getting there, but I've found my sort of my tribe. And the things that have been like sort of most consistent for me to apply to them is trying to be as hands off as possible,
Mm-hmm.
unless there's a very, very, very specific like weight management goal.
Okay.
The recovery aspect of it in a lot of ways is trying to reduce the stress overall of what their perception of the importance of nutrition might be. And this isn't to say it isn't extremely important, but pulling it back to things such as, if I can, through as vague terms as humanly possible, get them to be managing total calories or portion sizes, and then allocating enough protein to their diet, and then hydration, like
Yeah.
pretty big rocks there, and not have them overthink it, because that's a very slippery slope for a lot of people, where if you manage those three things for most people, they're going to see the lion's share of at least their initial progress. And then as they gain a little bit more of a developed control over those habits and start to understand them and the power of them a little bit more, maybe you can dig in with a little bit more of actual specifics and sort of pull back the veil on what you're actually trying to accomplish. But anytime I've dealt with, even to the level of just macros, trying to have someone that usually they'll approach me about it, like wanting to do the meal planning, or not, if not meal planning specifically, some sort of like actual more structured plan, more engaging plan. Either they fail outright because they fail to
Yeah.
launch, like they think they want it. I give them the initial steps, and then they just can't integrate that as a habit. And I'll fully cop that's a somewhat failing of, if not failing of me as the coach as well, because I probably low key am self sabotaging because I don't want to do it necessarily,
Right.
outside of those big rocks that I described, because of my previous history with people just not being ready for it or not truly wanting it despite what they say.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I've also grappled in the past with my own understanding of nutrition and the slippery slope of seeing when it first came out in the training space, like trainers trying to be trainers as well as nutritionists, because that's a less regulated term. You can call yourself a nutritionist no matter what, where you are in the legalities in terms of if there's medical things to account for, if there's not, can you actually prescribe meal plans? It's region to region, blah, 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 a whole bunch of crap that we don't really have to talk about. But the takeaway is, it became initially, when online and especially nutrition planning was a thing, it was just, here's your cookie cutter program, here's your templated nutrition plan regardless of who you are, and it's
Yeah.
going to work because it's going to go from whatever you were doing, which is probably nothing, to literally some form of structure. And
Yes.
then you'll crescendo to, or peak wherever I need you to do, and then we'll take all the photos, and then I'm going to launch you into orbit. You're no longer my client, and later, I don't care what the ramifications are.
Mm-hmm.
So I, with my background in nutrition and sort of being the legit at the time, the roast that I had about like the young trainer, 21, fresh degree, fucking pocket protector, the whole thing. It's like, no, I can do this better. We got to account for their relationship with food. We got to account for, being able to give them a diverse array of options, for accounting for all the macros I prescribed. That's a tremendous pain in the ass
Yeah.
on my end for organization, because I have to like start to account for their preferences, what's available, budgeting, the whole thing. And then they start to critically overthink it as well, where it's like, oh, if I'm not doing this exact thing, somehow it's going to be bad for my results or whatnot. So it started to become this weird slippery slope where I have all that knowledge and I've always been historically resistant to basically straight meal planning, or what I do, to bring this back to like full circle, the ruthless consistency of my training and my nutrition is it is ruthlessly consistent. Like I'll have the same things every single day without ever feeling as though I'm sort of like missing out. Like I go out with my wife, we'll do whatever we're going to do. I'll sort of do the loose mental math on how to adjust macros on the day. But I eat the same things day in and day out that counts for my major nutrition. I've always had the protein number there. I've had a fluctuating total calorie based upon my goals. But once I kind of lock certain things in, same breakfast meal, same mid-morning meal, same lunch, same dinner, same whatever I'm going to do day in, day out. And it's always in the back of your mind, or at least when I started, it was always this fear of doing that because I'm going to immediately develop disordered eating and I'm immediately going to develop a potential eating disorder in whoever I might prescribe that to. But there's such power in the consistency. So and that's sort of basically the full bow on why I resist doing a lot of nutritional counseling with people outside of basic education, because that's a personal relationship that they will have with their own diet that they have to figure out, like, is super consistency, not rigidity, not like canceling of food groups, nothing like that, but consistency for the sake of organization and being able to track properly and like have a better control over calories and so on and so forth. Is that the move, or is it give them the more pulled back sort of vague approach to generally controlling calories, making sure protein's definitely there, and let the things fall where they may? Because at the end of the day, those two majors are the recovery aspect, to tie it back to recovery: total calories, protein, carbs, and fat. There's obviously going to be minimum thresholds that are going to affect recovery in those respects too, especially depending on your sport or how you're going to train. But that's usually not the hardest thing for people to account for. It's the dramatic under eating of protein that most people will do that needs to be accounted for. Mm-hmm. And then you just sort of pull it back and see where they tease out. So the overall on it is, and it's the same with everything else in the self-education sphere that we started with training in general, with navigating the chaos. It's what is going to give them the most net forward progress from where they currently are right now, not as it relates in relativity to what is the maximum pace or maximum amount of forward progress that they could have, period. It's not shoving them into like this uniform, you have to do this. It's what will keep them moving forward consistently over the longest period of time. And as you mentioned earlier, the word consistency or compliance or adherence, like have them have that.
I really like that approach. And to me, it's always interesting to see what coaches preach versus what they do themselves, right? Because we've all, and I'm not necessarily saying that those two things have to be consistent or congruent, but I think we've all gotten to the place that we are with our training, with our diet, nutrition, recovery, stress management, all that stuff, because of, we can sum it up as education, but for me specifically, it's because of failing. Is kind of going down each of these routes until I found the fault in it, or where I started to falter in it. Is like a really good example is macro tracking. I think it's a really, really useful education tool, but I think it does kind of breed, like you said, disordered eating, right? Is that it's especially people with the mindset that they kind of, that style of nutritional compliance resonates with them, is they're very numbers oriented. And it becomes more about, having zeros on MyFitnessPal than it does actually the quality of the food that you're eating, or what you're actually eating, or sometimes even how you're feeling. So I think that's something that I found where I faltered in that. And it was around performance and how I was feeling. Is that, okay, I can hit these numbers, but how does that correlate? And that can be something that's very dynamic within the chaos of life. Right? Is that just because I'm in a phase of training that would dictate I should eat, this much protein, this many carbs, and this much fat, but there's all this other shit going on, and maybe I'm not sleeping, and whatever that might be, and I have a couple bad training days, that I think that needs to be equally as variable. The diet needs to be equally as variable as the program, the exercise regimen. So that's one that I learned a lot from, and I think the big thing is exactly what you said, is that most people just simply need to keep an account of how much protein they're eating through the day. Because that's literally, I've been manipulating my body composition since I was like in middle school for wrestling, my brief stint in bodybuilding, and now weightlifting. They're all weight class regulated sports. So it's something I'm very familiar with, and I'm very familiar with how to manipulate body weight and how I'm going to feel with the changes in diet. So it's something that going through and actually putting objective numbers on this through macro tracking was really helpful for me to actually build a more deep understanding of this is the exact correlation between each of these, these three variables, your macronutrients and how you're going to perform. So that was a very valuable learning experience, but it's something that was, it's a little too tedious for me. It doesn't really fit into the framework of life. Like if you're going to go out with your wife, it's great to be able to estimate what you're eating and all that, but you're not going to bring the scale and like pull apart your Popeyes chicken and weigh it out and whatever that might be. Your Nando's fries. So it's something that it's a really good educational tool. And once you have that education is you can think laterally and apply that to, all right, so what are the principles that I took from this that are really valuable that I can now continue to keep in my head, but it doesn't have to be as strict, right? I can be a little bit more variable in this process. And I think that's a really, really important takeaway from things like that is that it's all a learning process, is that none of these, fad diets or anything are really going to be the answer. But if you can look at it and you can rationalize, okay, like this is a low carb diet. You're probably going to lose some weight right away because you're going to have less water retention. You're going to look a little more cut up. You're probably going to be super low energy in your workouts. There's going to be a very quick diminishing return on something like that, but you're going to see results quick. So people are going to probably love it. And by the time they would have fallen off any diet anyways, then their results have stopped. So it's kind of this, it kind of breeds that cycle of, all right, this is working. I'm going to do this. I fell off, whatever. I'm going to do the next fad diet that comes up. But if you can communicate with your clients and get them to understand that these are the things, if you're eating more protein, it's going to be easier to recover from your workouts. You're going to be able to maintain your muscle mass better. Your fats are going to have a better correlation with maybe sleep quality, hormone production, things like that, recovery in that aspect. And then we can manipulate your carbs based off of training style, lifestyle, things like that. So I think kind of having that sort of templated framework, like you said, you did say the word template in there. And I think that kind of gets a bad rap because everyone wants individualized things nowadays. Everyone wants everything that's so specific to them. But the most specific thing to people is that we're all fucking humans and there's not very much variance in our biology. So if we can turn over these big rocks and find some sort of baseline and find some consistency with that, then we can start to make those more finite or individualized changes for each specific person.
Yeah, I think to follow up on something you just touched on, I think there's a misconception of, is this individualization that I seek, or is this just inconsistency that's happening? Because
Right.
exactly as you're describing, the me being on a templated meal plan basically for myself, that's the most highly individualized meal plan that I can have. It's exactly not only what I need, but it's specifically what I want. That's the other prong that maybe got lost in the conversation there is
Yeah.
I thoroughly enjoy the way I eat. Like over the years, and it's been the same with you having the capacity to utilize macros very effectively. A lot of these things are just maturing processes through the length of time that you've been either dieting uh, and or like pursuing nutrition for your goals, and training is the ability through that maturing process to realize how transient certain changes in your body will be on a day-to-day basis, how long the actual long-term results that you want will actually take to do. And especially if you're in that sort of headspace of, oh, I can't do, say, again, the demonized word of a template, or for me, it's just a consistent diet. The fallacy of, or the misconception of, I'm seeking individuality, like that's a lot of times for a lot of people, it's just an inconsistency. You can have individuality that is very consistent. I think that's a thing that those two things need to come together, and more people will see a dramatic amount of increased results.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really good way to look at it. And the thing that I'm pulling from this is there's a lot of parallels to kind of how we started this conversation around education and exercise, is that you're at this point where you know nothing, right? And you just need to try things and do things. And this is actually exactly how I coach Olympic weightlifting, which is a high skill, relatively complex movement pattern that demands a lot of qualities, is that someone that's brand new, I don't tell them shit. Like I just let them do what they're going to do and I observe and I watch. And maybe it'll be a session, maybe it'll be a week, maybe it'll be a month. that I'll just kind of give them gentle guidance towards this is what we want to do. Like these are the things that you're going to fuck yourself up if you continue to do. But when you start out and you know nothing, you just need to get experience. And you can use different things and try different things. So maybe that's a meal plan. Maybe that's macros. Maybe that's a low carb diet. Maybe it's keto. And you get all these tools and you get experience from all of them. And then you start to learn as you start to deepen that awareness around each of these variables. And maybe that's, to bring it back to snatch, maybe that's core bracing. Maybe that's lat engagement. Maybe that's foot pressure. Maybe that's overhead stability. As you start to kind of fuck these things up time after time, you realize how to fuck them up less every single time. Or every time you find a new way to fuck it up, you realize, okay, we're going to do less of that and more of the thing that was less fucked up. And that's basically all this is kind of bring it back to what you said about education when we first started this podcast, is that you get to a point of education where there's really a diminishing return on it because it just doesn't apply anymore, right? But when you're at this base level, you need as much experience, you need to grab from as many places as you can to start to understand how each of those is going to affect whatever it is that you're moving towards. And then once you have those experiences, then you get to a point where, okay, we're going to kind of hone this in. We're going to focus on only the stuff that's important for my goal. And then you get to that point, like you said, where it's, okay, I don't necessarily need to learn anymore. I just need to continue to apply. And I think that's a very good synonymous way to think of whether it's nutrition, whether it's training in general, is that we just need to get experience through different things. And what is it? Is it the Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's like confidence level skyrockets when you know like relatively nothing, and then it drops off dramatically the second you start to learn things, and it slowly starts to creep its way back up. Like I think that's exactly what I'm explaining in a way worse way.
I think pattern recognition is a good way of summarizing all of success in training, nutrition, being a trainer or a business owner. It's all pattern recognition, either of things that are benefiting or being detrimental to yourself, things that are benefiting or detrimental to your clients. And then in the exploration of social media or exploration of education within these spaces, as we started with, pattern recognition on if you're going to line up your proposed like Mount Rushmore of information on any of these spheres, what are all the things that they're consistently saying that are the same? Cool. Those are probably super big rocks. If everybody in a space like the internet, where it's like the algorithms and things like that are designed to foster toxicity by virtue of getting more eyes on product by that means, social media is not necessary. I've never considered it an educational platform, but for those that do, like, it's not your friend. It's not there to help you find proper education. It's very rewarding to things that are inflammatory. Whether people are trying to fleece you by doing that intentionally or not, that's a different story entirely. But look at your proposed Mount Rushmore of talking heads on the internet that are in those spaces and educating, and what are the things that they are most consistently repeating amongst each other. And those are probably the things that you should look into. I didn't say carbon copy. I said look into, in terms of how you may educate yourself in a deeper means. Courses, self-exploration through textbooks or other educational means, not just like listening to the soundbite and then going with it. But then on the opposite side of that, what are all the things that people like to get petty about? What are the smaller details that are like the defining characteristics between people, between their training philosophy, their nutritional philosophies, things like that? Very specifically, notice the word that I used. It's their philosophy, because we've established that the things they're consistently saying together are probably the more principally driven things. Everything outside of that becomes more of a probably less confirmed, less validated, more training philosophy or nutritional philosophy thing. That doesn't mean it's wrong. It doesn't mean it's right. It's probably amoral. Hopefully they're not just doing it to scam people. But it's something that you should not necessarily, again, take as fact. It's examine it and sort of see where it might fit and benefit you or your clients, as opposed to just accepting things like writ large at face value.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And we're getting to a place, I'd like to think we're getting to a place where people are starting to contextualize these things better. Maybe not on social media, but at least in more expanded long form scenarios, maybe like a podcast like this or any specific education, like the stuff that we do at www.pre-script.com. Just a little plug there. But that's a very interesting idea, is that the idea between of philosophy and principles, right, is that the principles are pretty well established at this point. And kind of thinking back to the pattern recognition is, I remember, and this is even before clickbait was a thing, this is like articles in like Men's Fitness or Men's Health, or like all the bodybuilding magazines back in the day, is that there's always these like, I don't even know the word for it, but now it would be clickbaity titles to the articles. And I'm like, oh, I've never heard of something like this before. And then I'll read the article and I'll be like, oh, they're just saying the same shit I already knew. And that kind of confirms that this stuff is pretty well established, right? There's only so many ways to skin a cat, and a lot of those have been established already. Is that the things that people have been doing for decades now, they work. And there's not necessarily a new solution or a more expedient solution than what's already been established. And if it is, and it's very drastically different from the things that you've already heard, it's probably a little bit of bullshit. So that I think is the really important thing. And alongside of that, the whole contextualizing of the information is, I think people speak from their perspective, right? So if they have their training philosophy, maybe it's based in principles. A lot of this stuff is going to work for a lot of people. But then the thing that makes them different for their niche is that they found these things that work really well for themselves or their population. So that could be someone with a very similar body type, someone within a specific sport. So that could, a sport will often dictate the shape of an athlete. So it kind of goes back to similar body type, similar mechanics as they go through it, specific injuries, things like that. So I think that's something to be very aware of, is that just because someone, and that's a lot of times where people that are very dogmatic in the way that they think that way because this has worked really well from them in their experience and with their population, with their experience. But it's also a very narrowed view that it's not going to work. What's going to work for a professional basketball player isn't going to work for a professional golfer or competitive power lifter. There's all types of different things. So we need to understand that, yes, the base principles are probably the same here, but the way that we apply it, that's going to be the philosophy that we approach each specific population with. And that's never going to be this big blanket statement.
I think that there just needs to be more transparency about that, because I highly encourage, whenever we do any seminars, whenever we go into our course content or even in labs, like, we go fast, and the goal isn't necessarily to deliver a protocol per se. It's to deliver your ability to critically think and appraise situations and make better decisions faster. That's a really, really powerful sort of line that Shala started using, because it's true. Yeah. We're not necessarily giving you the specific answer. We're giving you all the information you could possibly ever need to navigate any situation. And what I highly encourage people to do is not necessarily shoot for the most complex thing that you just learned, or learned in air quotes, because you probably don't have a great command over it, but rather stick to the thing that you do have the greatest command over, and then slowly start to explore and apply all the things that you are learning. Because that's, at the end of the day, what we were sort of just describing. The things that are more principally grounded from all sources are the things that are going to work for most people most of the time in the most predictable pattern. Things that you have the greatest degree of control over, the greatest experience level, the warning signs of if things are going sideways, the thing that you have the greatest command over, that's probably where you should spend most of your time, and then be branching out slowly over the course of your career to expand what your greatest command sort of real estate happens to be. Because this is a long, long game. The average amount of time that you train any individual, if you're lucky, it could be for years. Yeah. But if you're not, it could be 6 months to 9 months, and then you're starting over, and you're starting over, and you're starting over with new people. Either you accomplish their goal, or they moved on for whatever reason. So having things that will work to help achieve the greatest amount of success as fast as you can for each individual, that's a powerful asset. And then you'll have a greater degree of cards to play slowly over time as you develop them through the length of a career.
Yeah, I really like that outlook. And I would just kind of sum it up as self-assessment, right? Is that every client you have is a chance to look back at the last client that you have, assess the process that you went through with them, and refine it, right? Is something I'm constantly trying to do. Like, as much as I hate hearing my voice on the internet, I'll listen back to some of these podcasts. I'm like, oh, you sound like such an idiot. Stop saying so much, or whatever it is, as I say it right now. But as I learn, at least, I like to go back and take a snapshot of the previous time I did a similar thing and start to poke holes in it, right? It's like, okay, this is the new information that I have. How can I use this to negate something I did in the past? And if you can't, then you've probably done a pretty good job with it. And if you can, then that's an opportunity to improve. I think that's a really good way to look at this, is that we're lucky enough to be involved with this thing that we do, that we get to talk to a lot of people that are career trainers, which I think is, if you look at the amount of people that have been in the training industry versus the amount of people that are and will be career trainers, I think it's a very small percentage, because you have to be able to have that process. It takes a lot of attributes to be successful in this. And it looks a lot of different ways. Like the way that you handle clients is different than the way I handle clients versus, LA, he's probably in the gym right now on a lab on his video call, doing whatever they're doing. But it's not necessarily a specific personality type, but it's this understanding of constant refinement, is that you need to be able to self-assess, and you need to be able to be variable in your processes, because I don't know how many people I've trained in the past. I don't know how many you've trained in the past, but after you get to a certain number of clients, you start to see the same clients over and over again, right? Same client, different face. Like, oh, I remember you. You're just like Joe, the accountant, or, whoever it might be. But you've seen that person before, and you understand what motivates them. You understand how you need to treat them in that training scenario. And if you can continue to refine and assess that process and become better at it, then it's, we're all in the people business, is really what it is we're not necessarily, the reps in the sense don't matter. It's the mindset, as we need to build trust with the client. We need to get them to feel confident that we can get them to their goals. We need to, of course, have that baseline level of knowledge and understand the principles that are going to allow us to get them there. But it's really just, can you build that trust with your client, and are they going to buy into what you're telling them to do? Because the shit works. Like you said, you can give them a template push pull legs and a template meal plan, it's going to work, but you're the one that has to get them to show up every single day.
I think that's a hallmark of a good trainer, especially one that's been around for a while, is I think most of us, if you were to ask us to look back, like I was going to say longer, but 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago, however long you've been, like even 6 months ago, and analyze what you did, there's probably someone you want to apologize to, because
yeah,
fuck, you learned more, you had the experience improvement, whatever. And it's not necessarily, and that's, like I said, that's a hallmark of a good coach, good trainer, someone that's constantly developing. You're going to realize like the things you got right, the things you could improve upon. But the idea is that at all times, you're not rigidly adherent to a very specific thing. You're guided by principles. And as you're sort of referring to, you're keen on developing relationships with people, and they trust you that I don't necessarily have the headspace of a client per se, but I want to believe that they trust you to help them get better and pursue their goals. They don't know what the literal best thing happens to be. They don't know how far off the mark you may be as you're developing. But the hallmark is being able to reflect and know where you have improved, and to constantly be moving in that direction, while not also just stifling people by shoving them into the same mold of what you think should be how they should train. Like being able to be flexible enough in your application to actually see forward progress.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think an important takeaway out of that statement for people that are probably listening to this podcast is that, I don't know about you, but I get sick of talking about this shit. We talk about the most minute details day after day. And like, trust me, I love it. I love what I do. And I love having these conversations, especially when there's someone that's going to yield value out of it. But we're so far down the rabbit hole that this shit doesn't matter anymore, right? With a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And I think trainers and people in our position can be very self-critical because of that, right? They're looking at the things that they're saying, the things that they're putting out there, the things that they're doing with their clients through the lens of how another trainer would assess it, right? Versus how you just said is how does a client look at this? A client doesn't care if you're at, I don't know, 15 degrees of horizontal abduction versus 20 for your lat pull down, or whatever the fuck. I don't even care. But they care that you have their best interests at heart and in mind, and you're showing up for them and you're giving them a good experience. They don't really care if you're giving them the most optimal workout. So I think that's a really important thing, is that if you're a trainer, especially if you're a career trainer and you've gone down this rabbit hole of continuing education to the point that you've found this podcast, you're doing a lot of things right. It's just focus on the people aspect and don't worry so much about the finite details. The periodization will happen. if you understand how to read a person and see that, oh, this person's tired today because they had a really shitty day at work and maybe they didn't have lunch and they only had 6 shots of espresso instead of 12. So we're going to lighten things up, or we're going to choose a different variation than what we've been progressing. So it's understanding that you're training the person. It's not necessarily about these super, super niche concepts that a lot of times we get lost in. That's where the knife fights happen on the internet.
Yeah, they're cards to play. They're ninja stars to throw when you have the opportunity to do so. But there's a nice inflection point, and it's something that brings all aspects of this conversation together where the it doesn't matter starts to become more and more prominent when you start to account for allostatic load, when you start to account for individual preferences of a client or availability of equipment, things of that nature. Because people get very self-analytical, they get very imposter syndrome-y, Dunning-Kruger-y, due to the fact that things can be right. And I've said this on the podcast last time, and it not actually matter. Like, because I'll call out the people that are doing great things that are absolutely correct, but I won't employ what they're talking about because it doesn't matter for the person.
Mm-hmm.
But people will be super rigidly attached to that because they're afraid, as you mentioned, that someone that is also a trainer most likely will call them out on something that doesn't impact that trainer nor their clientele base, and the person that they're calling out, their clients are seeing progress and everybody's happy. So there's this inflection point where you get down the rabbit hole so far that the net amount of improved progress that they may experience from being that far down into the details, it's more you weaponizing your own knowledge base against other people that might talk shit, even though that's also something that you shouldn't be concerned with if you're helping your clients and they're seeing success.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you this much, like my training is very impacted by my own allostatic load. Like I have a handful, the same way you described originally your sort of layout. I have my go-to push-pull legs. I have cardio sessions. I have certain things that I've been doing for years that will either help me make progress when I can strike while the iron's hot, or at the very minimal, keep me pretty much within strike zone of where I would want to be, given the opportunity to double down on recovery and sleep and stress management. And anything outside of that, like I'm super influenced by like allostatic load with respect to my amount of sleep, stress, projects I'm currently taking on, consistency of food that is then going to be impacted by all those other things that I just mentioned. My social battery is basically always running at like power saving mode. Like it's like at 20% at all times, and doing anything basically drains it. And it's not to say I don't enjoy.
Fuck off.
Like it's not to say that I don't enjoy doing things. It's that I need to not sometimes. So that'll directly influence like the consistency of my programming. You laid out 4 days a week, certain exercises are the main sort of criteria of the day, and then you make modifications as you go. Sometimes I just fuck completely off.
Yeah.
Oh, it's supposed to be legs today? No, I'm going to go light myself on fire on a piece of cardio because that's going to be something that helps maintain my health, but also is the only thing I can probably safely train today where I can minimize social interaction and just reset my own level of like, again, it's a social thing. But if I go and try to enter the weight room and the first person that's on the machine that I wanted, even though they have all the right in the world to be on that machine, I will lose my shit internally and be like, but it's a switch. And I guarantee a ton of people can relate to this. The smallest little barrier when you're in that sort of headspace or when you're at a high stress sort of level, that tiny little blip is all the barrier you need to be like, man, fuck this whole workout. I might leave. Or in my case, I'm just going to go hit two sets of whatever the hell happens to be available and try to do some maintenance run. I'm out of here. Yeah. That's a pro and a con born off of like 20 plus years of training where I know I can do that and still maintain that strike zone of where my strength, physique, whatever I care about at the time happens to be. But that's a very real thing that not all 24 hours in the day are the same for everybody. And not all levels of abduction of my arm during my lat pull down matter when I need to do whatever I need to do to maintain my progress and not literally just explode.
Yeah. I'm going to put this out there for the greater good. I'm a little bit hesitant too because everyone's going to know my secret now. But Marshall, you definitely need to cut this for social media. The biggest fuck off move is the headphones with no music. Just put headphones in so you can clearly hear everything going on around you and choose to ignore everything going on around you. That's it. That's the play.
The strangest thing I've encountered is, so I can be awkward. I feel like we all can be awkward.
Absolutely.
But the lack of perception of social cues in a place that is social for a lot of people, but isn't necessarily social for everybody, like a gym.
Right. Yeah.
If I can't look you in the eyes as I'm walking past, it might be a sign that like this is a person that's not in an approachable state right now. But the amount of times that just sort of happens, and I'm like, sick. I happen to be wearing the shirt. I should probably be nice and approachable and not misrepresent the brand. But like that, and those are some of the major rocks where it's like you have to adjust on the fly. The chaos is chipped away at the potential top end value of this session, and do what you got to do to make sure you get something actually valuable out of it.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting point that you brought up, because it's very different for probably your or my training versus a client's training, is that there is a very large social component to exercise, right? I think a lot of people, especially a lot of people that I coach, they come in after work. Maybe a lot of them work remote, so they don't have any social interaction all day. And they come into the gym and they just want to hang out with people, have a good time. And then the exercising is kind of something that happens. It's a vehicle for that. So that's something that I was really frustrated with training clients, until I realized that, oh, that's okay. Like, this is why they're here. They're here for the social interaction. Like, they just want to come in and talk to me for an hour, and there's going to be some net positive on the benefit to their life if we move while they're doing it, but they're not here to get better. They don't want to squat for bills. They just want to talk to someone and move their body for an hour because they feel better when they leave. And I think that's something that it took me a really long time to understand and be okay with. And then once I did, it cleared up a lot of frustration in training clients for me.
Yeah, to validate that, again, I've been doing this for 11, 12 years now. The consistency of that archetype of a person, especially when you're in like the Gen Pop space or you're just training anyone you can get your hands on, it's okay. In the back of your mind as the trainer, you're always trying to expedite progress as much as you possibly can, deliver them to their goals. Like, that's your prime directive. You're constantly trying to do that no matter what. What that might look like, the pace and the success rate for each individual person, it is on a per person basis sort of expectation management thing. Because like you said, that archetype of a person, that they're getting probably a greater degree of health benefits from, yes, training, obviously, but the training is going to do what it's going to do no matter what. But being able to either dissociate from their work stress, interact with you, whatever they're actually getting secondarily from that experience, that's a part of their experience that they have sought out. That is part of it. And it ties back into the Dunning-Kruger, to the anxiety of being a young trainer and sort of feeling like most of the time other trainers might be judging you, even though no one should.
Cares.
And if they are, they are pieces of shit. But like, the percentage of my roster that has been like fucking head down, zero to gains, all the way through, versus the much larger percentage of across my career that are like in that middle space where they're still seeing great progress, but it's a combination of things that they're seeking out, whether they realize it or not. Most of those things are like, there are issues that are within the head of the trainer that they just need to get some semblance of reality on, where not everybody is an athlete. Everybody's a NARP. More people are NARPs than athletes. More people are NARPs than competitors. If you happen to be listening to this and you are in the competitive space, probably flip that on its head and be a little bit more rigidly adherent because they're asking you for that. But the client themselves will present to you the archetype of how you should move forward from it. And then, like you said, with one of your original statements is, you watch people do stuff and you don't say shit. And then once they present you the data you need, you can make the specific tailored amendments based upon that. It's the same in your intake. It's the same as you start to develop a relationship with the client. It teases itself out where on the continuum of full send, push them all the way down that competitive style of training, or the more rigid adherence, versus meeting them in the middle, versus maybe they just are here because of the peripheral benefits of just exercising generally. Like, they're getting health just by doing the thing broadly, and they are more so benefiting from being able to dissociate from work or stress or anything else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To be an effective trainer, you need to be able to afford food and shelter and live life. So you need money, right? I've probably worked with more athletes, we'll say, like people that pay their bills doing athletic things, than most people. Definitely, like if we look at my graduating class from chiropractic college, Shallow is probably the only one that works with more athletes than me, out of like 160 or some shit like that. So there's not many people that are going to pay their bills working with athletes, right? I think it's something that a lot of people strive for, and maybe if you get into some niche or you work with a school or a sports team, that's awesome. That's it. But most people, it's going to be the NARPs that pay your bills, right? And not saying that the only thing we should strive to do is make money. But unless you're a successful trainer, like the people we're talking about that are career trainers, they're able to help more people because they're living comfortably, right? You're going to be more motivated to stay in the field, and you're going to do it for longer. And by proxy, you're going to affect more lives if you can make a living doing it. So the most beneficial thing for you to do is learn how to deal with these people, deal with their mindset, understand what motivates them. When I say these people, but like normal people, the hump on the bell curve, that middle third of the normal distribution, that's who you need to deal with. And every now and then you'll get someone on the tail end, and that's fucking sick. Like, I've worked with the entire distribution. I've worked with people that have crazy neurological deficits that can't even walk a straight line. I've worked with people that, are making millions of dollars playing sports. And then I've worked with everything in between. And the things that pay my bills are everything in between, because the people over here, they need a lot of attention. They need very specialized care that becomes very expensive. So I don't charge them much money. The people over here, they're expecting everything for free, and they have everything available to them under the sun. So I don't charge them much money, or any money usually. So it's the people in the middle these are the people that see the tail ends of what you're doing. They're like, oh, wow, like this person can help this person and also this person over here. So they must be able to help me. And that's where you're going to make your living, is understanding how to adjust this, meet people where they're at, work with different mindsets, understand their motivation, what's going to keep them compliant. And there's that baseline level of education that once you reach it, it does apply to all these people, all these situations, all these scenarios. You just need to know how to scale it appropriately.
Yeah, to bring it back together to like training and nutrition and recovery and things like that, like your own hierarchy of needs is a part of your own allostatic load. Like
Yeah.
if you want to compare it to your training or just all of it, it all kind of has the same archetype of what success requirements exist. And if you're not able to take care of yourself within the field of being a trainer or a coach, that's a huge stressor that's going to then impact pretty much everything else that you care about in terms of training, relationships with other people. Like when I've been in the commercial gym for long enough where as new trainers would come by, like it's the old adage of you don't learn their name until they've been here for a year. Nothing crazy like that, obviously, but it's like you see so much turnover that more specific to that, my genuine advice to them would be to like make peace with like your relationships, make peace with your nutrition, make peace with your like your scheduling, stuff like that. Make sure they're all lined up, because it's a rough go. And I think a lot of people make it rougher on themselves by not appreciating that the fact that we just were speaking to, in terms of you're going to find more people in that middle of the bell curve. You're going to be dealing with NARPs. You're going to be helping adjust your expectations as a trainer to meet their non-expectations as the client. You're always going to be giving them forward progress, but you're not trying to impose the craziest protocols. You're not trying to make sure that they're shoved into the square peg when it's a round hole sort of situation or whatnot. And if you're able to get past that, everyone wins.
I love it. I think this was a very productive conversation around just training in general. The kind of the journey through a trainer's career. It starts kind of how we started this, talking about education. You need to learn these principles. You'll eventually come up with your own philosophy around training, and that'll hopefully help you find your niche. As you find your niche, you'll understand how to communicate with them, motivate with them, get compliance out of them. And those are going to be the things that help you really build a solid foundation, a solid base. And then ending with the things that you said, is that really logistics around this is that training is a shitty, shitty career to get into, because it's very hard to find a business model that works, or there's not very many well-established business models out there that you can just hop into the system, like any sort of corporate job type thing. Is that a lot of times people just kind of have to make it on their own. So you have to be very organized. You have to understand how to get your scheduling right, your payments right. You have to do the accounting on the back end. You have to wear a lot of hats as you do this stuff. And, if you're training 40 hours a week, that means you probably have another 20 hours a week. You need to figure this shit out. So maybe just bail now if you're listening to this. Just kidding. But no, it takes a lot to be a successful trainer. It really does. And I have a lot of respect for the people that are in this field and do really well. And I think there's a lot of people that we've gotten to meet through Prescript, or they're doing really good things that we can learn a lot from. So if you're listening to this and you know people like that, send them our way so we can get them on the podcast. We'll get them in the collective. Eric does a great job with the emerging ideas, a short lecture series that we have available to all of our collective members. We just get to get exposure to people that are high performers in their area of the field and start to get a little bit of their perspective on being a trainer, being successful in business, all kinds of different things. Yeah, anything to add, Eric?
Just from my experience and probably yours as well, and it's back to the sort of Mount Rushmore. What are they saying that's all the same analogy I gave earlier? Even with respect to a lot of the emerging ideas lectures or just anything, it's like you're going to start to see the people that have found success where you want to find success, either in training, specifically in training, as I'm sure you can speak to more than me, like dealing with athletes or dealing with like actual performance sports like Olympic lifting and so on. But within training, within being a trainer or a coach or a clinician, most of the people that you'll talk to that are in a position that you want to be, you'll start to see serious pattern recognition, serious recurring themes of what got them to be there in their, what were the assets to their success long term. So if anything else, through the emerging ideas lecture series, through any educational resource that you're trying to figure out, leverage, whatnot, pattern recognition. What are they saying that is more similar than it is different? And those are probably the big rocks moving forward for pretty much everything.
Amazing. Love it. Where can people go to find you, Eric?
Instagram is at Eric Bagheera. That's probably the easiest way to get in contact with me. I troll all the time on the internet.
Love it.
If you're in the Prescript Collective, I'm pretty active consistently on the Discord server. I'll probably want to be one of the lead people that'll try to field a lot of your questions early and often. So the Discord server through the Prescript Collective, and then basically anywhere else that Prescript exists, that's probably the easiest way to get a hold of me. If it's a lab, if it's anything, most of the time I'll be present.
I love it. Thanks for your time, Eric.